and in the hours in the right environment. So like Agassi went to, I think at 12 or 13, he went to the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy in Florida and lived there. And that was his life for 6-7 years. And you need to make those big choices and hit the tennis balls and then you need the persistence and all the rest. You need a little bit of everything.
And what age did you decide that was a route for you?
I was the youngest of four who all played tennis, so it was always a big part of my life, and I was always good at it, and I suppose constantly taking it in stages. You know, I was 7 or 8, I was playing in tournaments in Limerick and Munster, and then it would go to national tournaments, and 11, 12, then started to go abroad to Europe and on to college in the States, and then the Pro Tours. There was always these sort of...
It was a scholarship in the States, was it?
Yeah, I went to Berkeley in California on a tennis scholarship. So I was constantly... I suppose dreaming about it, but then I talk about it in the book at 12 or 13. I go to this big tournament in France, which is kind of like the unofficial World Junior Championships, and I'm looking around now. In hindsight, I was a year young for the age group, but I was looking around going, God, these guys are so good, you know. And I was number 1 in Ireland, but in Europe was, you know, a good bit down the rankings, and I kind of thought, gee, maybe I'm not going to win Wimbledon here. But you know, I kept going and managed to have some success in tennis and playing the biggest tournaments. But yeah, it was a lifetime journey.
And those journeys you were done with your family supporting you, obviously you weren't alone in the younger years, were you?
No, they were massively important. And to be honest, if it wasn't for the odd nudge from them, the support was there, but also the odd nudge, you know, go and practice. The days you don't want to practice, you still got to go practice. You don't want to play a tournament, well, you still got to play the tournament. This is kind of what we do. And so there were moments where I didn't want to do those things, but I was kind of pushed to do it at times. And, you know, there's pros and cons to that, but obviously it helped me achieve things. And by the time I was 18 and 19, I was kind of driving it myself. But there was moments in my teenage years where I could have left it behind. But my parents were sort of like, no, keep going. And I did.
And your role models growing up in tennis, I mean, be born in Birmingham, come back to Limerick and being Irish, it's not a ground as well for our tennis in this country even in those years. So do you not feel you're following a sport that was unlikely, and what motivated you to keep all that on the road? You know, they say with rugby or soccer, there must be those role models you look at, I want to do that because it is possible. But in tennis to reach, I mean, we grew up with Matt Doyle, imports, and the Davis Cup, that was incredible, but they weren't born here. So we said, well, that makes sense. But for somebody to be native and say tennis is my chosen field, apart from Sean Sorensen in my time, Matt Doyle, it was very unusual.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess I fell in love with tennis. So at 5, 6, 7, I was watching Wimbledon and I wanted to be Stefan Edberg and Boris Becker. And they were my idols and role models. It was in my family that we played tennis. We lived across the road from a great tennis club in Birmingham, and my sister got really into it. So when we moved back to Ireland, tennis was kind of our main sport, even though my dad had played Gaelic football. So you don't sit down at 7 or 8 with a piece of paper and go, what are my percentage, what are the possibilities here for me to be a pro? I think I should choose rugby, and rugby wasn't professional when I was growing up. It was an amateur sport. So as were Gaelic football and hurling. So my 2 sports were tennis and soccer. I loved soccer as well. But yeah, tennis was the thing I was best at, I suppose. I was a good soccer player too. But I guess, I loved it. I enjoyed it. I had my ups and downs with it, obviously, but at that really young age, it was just sort of, what I did and what I was good at.
And your up moments would be, in your mind?
I suppose the main feeling for me that I take away is that moment I qualified for Wimbledon. And that match point and falling to my knees and putting my head in my hands and just all that relief. I've just gotten release. I've gone, I've done it. I've gotten to the holy grail at Wimbledon, and now everybody who I speak to I'll be able to say I played Wimbledon, and they'll understand. I was a good tennis player. I was a professional, and that was important for me, because at the time, I'd already won a couple of challenger events. But you say that to somebody, and they don't really know what that means, but they understand what it means to play in Wimbledon. So that was definitely the highlight, along with obviously qualifying for US Open as well, and getting out on a big court in New York against Novak Djokovic was great, even though I was not feeling very well for that match. It was still great to do that as well.
And how's that feel, when you're out there facing a big monster like that? where'd you get the resources, even though you weren't well, to say, I've got to do this? Is the mind very strong?
Yeah, I mean, I was so motivated to get out there. It was a shame I was obviously not well, and knew I was never going to be competitive, really. You know, in reality, I wouldn't have played the event. I wouldn't have played the match if it was any sort of other event other than a Grand Slam. So, just went out and hoped for the best. And actually did. I've watched the match back a couple of times. I actually didn't do, considering how I was feeling, didn't do too bad. You know, there were some decent points on that, but it was a tough ask. But I'm glad I went out and played, and I'm so glad I didn't, you know, retire and pull out of the tournament and not get out on court, because it was I still had some lovely moments and people calling from the stand, you know, out calling out where they were from and towns in Ireland. That was a really special moment.
And when you rewatch it a few times, is there a few places you think something might change, or you could have?
A bit more when I watched the Wimbledon match. There's definitely a few more switches of momentum, shall we say, in the Wimbledon match. The US Open was all one way. But no, there were some really good points in the US Open one at times. But I just couldn't, I just couldn't sustain anything. I couldn't play two good points in a row. I wasn't able to get up on my serve. My movement wasn't where it was. It was just, it wasn't pretty, unfortunately. But yeah, still, you know, great to have played out there.
And do people like Novak have an aura? Are they in a different league?
Yeah, they have an aura for sure. Whether that's, from my perspective, putting an aura on them or them giving one off, I'm not sure, but probably a bit of both. But, you know, I talk about it in the book, you know, that they have a kind of the very top guys have a kind of a gilded quality to them, that they almost look like they've been painted gold. You know, they've got the best of everything, I suppose, and they've got a big team with them. They're at the top of the world, and they kind of look it. So no, it was interesting to see these guys, you know, really up close, and they are intimidating and they have a definite presence. When they walk into the locker room, you notice.
They look through you rather than at you.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think everyone's got their guard up on the tour a little bit, even though I suppose the guards come down at certain moments. But yeah, it's not easy. It's not a place where people aren't going onto the tour to make friends. Yeah. People aren't being difficult, or, you know, generally, I don't, you know, there aren't people being difficult with each other, but there isn't a friendship. It's not that kind of an environment, except maybe when you're with your compatriots, with your own people from Ireland or from the States or wherever, they tend to stick together a little bit. But mostly guys are kind of out there on their own with their own teams.
How do you carry Irishness when you're abroad? How does that feel? Is that a big issue in your mind? A feeling you have is only noticeable to you?
Yeah, it was definitely a big part of my journey was me being Irish in the sense that I was excited to try and be the first Irish guy to, you know, do X, Y, and Z, play in Wimbledon in 30 years, etc. And that definitely was a motivation and kept me going. You know, I think if I had been American or French and that, I think it wouldn't have been maybe quite as special, maybe qualifying into Wimbledon. It still would have been, no doubt about that, but maybe it gave it that little bit of extra sweetness, maybe, to be the first guy to do it in a long time. So, and then obviously being Irish meant I suppose didn't have anyone on the tour with me, more or less. There was a couple of guys who were a little bit younger than me, but we weren't quite at the same tournaments. So I was kind of on my own a lot, you know, apart from maybe with a coach or whatever. So yeah, being Irish had its challenges, I suppose, for me, as you alluded to earlier in the chat, you know, that it was a bit of an unusual thing maybe for an Irish guy to do, trying to make it on the tour, and that probably did make it that little bit harder for me as well. The tour is a tough place, but being an Irish guy on the tour was maybe even a little bit tougher.
I can imagine. But was your Irishness made more acute because your family were in England, you were born in England, or you were more conscious of it, or was just...
No, I don't think so. Like I moved back to Ireland when I was 3, so I've no memory of being in England and growing up in England. You know, my parents and my older brothers and sisters would talk about things that happened in England, or, you know, family memories and stuff. Yeah. But it was only just stuff I'd hear around the kitchen table. I never remembered anything about it. So that was a part of it. But no, yeah, I mean, you get the odd comment that, oh, you were born in England, you're not Irish at all, you know, and stuff. And I'm like, oh, well, nothing I can do about that,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So no, it was that was all fine.
Look, I was born in Brazil.